our work right now on the planet is to bring honoring and sanctity to the invisible just as much as the visible. The invisible results are things like feeling good, things like feeling connected, things like our health, our well-being, a feeling of joy, pleasure.
Embodiment can't be faked. Once you're in an open state where you actually can see through a clear lens, you're not clouded by fear, you're not clouded by the amygdala, you're not clouded by the society's news and all the fear-based stuff, and you're just with you. Then you get to decide where you think we actually are.
It is possible to navigate pain with grace.
Energy is information. We're here to experience the full spectrum.
That worthiness is hard for you. There's nothing wrong with you. It is a muscle that we kind of have to learn how to access. You are not disempowered, and you have power in every area of your life all the time.
I believe that chronic illness is an opportunity for us to heal.
Health, it's a choice. Listening to your body if you so choose.
My prayer for the world would be that they would know the infinite love of God.
Aloha and welcome to the Body and Soul Wisdom Podcast with your host, Jen Mons. Join me each week for soul-inspired, conscious conversations around awakening to your soul purpose through 5-element well-being. Thank you so much for joining in. Aloha and welcome back, my friends and family, to the Body and Soul Wisdom Podcast. Today's episode, I'm going to share with you some insights and celebrations on the 5th anniversary of this podcast show. So I originally started out in 2016 with a podcast called Health Conscious Horizons. And that lasted a couple months. During the time in March of 2016, I came up against a very challenging personal time in life with the grief and loss of the passing of my brother-in-law. And I realized how important it was to have a system in place for your podcast to be consistent for when life happens. So I came back in 2019 and hired a podcast producer through a coach that I had at the time. My coach was Amber Lillystrom, and her husband, Ben, was starting his own business as a podcast producer. He had helped her take her podcast to the next level, bringing on guests, creating the show notes and the platform. And so when I set the intention to do a podcast the second time, I hired myself a producer. And it's been going strong since then for 5 years. 2024, March 21st, will be 5 years of the podcast. So I'm going to share with you a couple of questions that some of the women in my community asked me about podcasts, because I have supported quite a few business owners to launch their podcast. The first question I get asked is it worth it? Do you enjoy it? And my answer to that is that if you're someone who loves to teach, if you're someone who's super creative and has a lot to say, then absolutely it's worth it. And I wouldn't do it if I didn't enjoy it. The next question I got asked is, how long will you do the podcast? And my answer to that question is, I don't know. I'll do it as long as it's enjoyable, as long as it feeds my soul and doesn't feel out of alignment. The next question I get asked is, what are the tricks and tips in order to stay consistent? And one of the things that I do is, number one, hire a podcast producer, so that all I have to do is record the podcast. I send everything to her. My podcast producer edits it, although I hardly have my podcast episodes edited because I like to keep them authentic and imperfect. But she does the show notes, she'll drop the links, she'll create a podcast media share kit for my podcast guests. She'll send it out in my newsletter. And then from there, I have another virtual assistant who takes the podcast episodes and creates YouTube shorts, reels, videos, all with my voice, my transcription, and I multi-purpose the podcast episodes. So it's really worth it when you have a team of people supporting you so that you can multi-purpose your podcast episodes. I use the podcast episodes in my course offerings. A lot of times, whatever the module is that we're going through in the course, there's a podcast episode related to it, so I'll link those in the course. I'll repurpose the podcast episode as social media post through YouTube, through Instagram, through Facebook, through newsletter, through blog posts. Because I had someone say to me, well, I can't really listen to the podcast at work, but if you created it as a blog, I could read it. And so that's what I did. So there's so many ways that you can repurpose your podcast. First is create a platform around your branding, something that you want to create conversation around that brings people together. It allows people to get to know who you are. Allows you to build trust with your audience. Secondly, hire help. Hire a producer and some virtual assistants. If this is something that you want to have, whether it's just for fun or in your business, you're less likely to be consistent and sustainable if you don't have support. And support can look very, very different. Financially, it can cost anywhere from probably $600 to $1,000 a month to about $2,000 a month to have a podcast. Just depends on where you are in your business and how much you repurpose it, how much editing you do. That's what the investment can look like. Hire support. Find ways to repurpose your podcast. And the best part about it is you get to have conversations with people that you normally wouldn't get to have conversations with. I've had created so many amazing relationships with people that if I didn't have a podcast, I wouldn't have had the ability to create friendships and relationships with. And it started by having them as a guest on my show. Some of my favorite guests have been Kate Northrup, Xavier Dagba, Josh Trent. Those would probably be my top three. Tara Romano. I enjoyed having her on the podcast as well. And it's really this great space to collaborate with amazing people who are passionate about the same things that you're passionate about. What were some of my top downloaded episodes? The Toxic Cycle of People Pleasing. Is your extreme independence a trauma response? Everything Starts with Breathwork with Josh Trent. Lead with your gifts, not your shadow with Xavier. Cycles. I can't remember the name of the episode, but the episode with Kate Northrup. And of course, my entire 10-week prosperity series. I get feedback on the prosperity series all the time. People are learning and healing their relationships with money and love in their business and in their life. What are some fears that come up? around hosting a podcast, speaking your truth. This is one of those conversations where I talk about the difference between passion and purpose. I'm not passionate about speaking my truth and sharing it. It's part of my purpose. It's extremely uncomfortable for me. There will be fears of rejection, abandonment, betrayal that will come up when you choose to speak your truth. But this is where we get to own part of our purpose and not bypass by only making decisions on the things that light us up and are our passions, but we combine that with what we know is part of our purpose. Yes, our passion is our purpose, but sometimes there are the things that we don't want to do that contribute to our purpose. And one of my life purposes that I know to be true is to be a teacher, a speaker, and an author. And so a podcast was a platform for me to open that gate, to speak my truth. Has it gotten easier in the last 5 years? Sometimes. It's still really uncomfortable. So I hope that I've given you permission, if you're a person who is thinking about starting a podcast, to create some curiosity about what that might look like. Create space for the decisions, the next steps that come into place in order to take that aligned action for that podcast to become a reality. It's a wonderful platform for connection. It's my favorite part. I've often thought if I were to continue the podcast, a trend that I'm noticing is that people are flying their guests in to record in the studio. And I know I'm a quality time person, that I would really love that. It would be more comfortable because it would be connection, in-person connection. But I haven't decided that that's the route I want to go, because I get the in-person connection through my retreats. So now I want to hear from you. What were your favorite episodes over the last 5 years? What were your takeaways? Some of my biggest takeaways from 5 years on the podcast. People are listening more than you think. Way more than you think. We have this thing where most people are not really good about giving positive feedback. Surprisingly, it's pretty hard to get a podcast review or a book review. Most people are so caught up in their daily grind, they're not thinking or celebrating the people or the things that they've heard that have helped them to get to where they are. When we stop and really give gratitude and thanks for the people who we're learning from, we expand that consciousness. So it's important to do, to recognize, to celebrate, to reach out to the person whose podcast episode changed your life and let them know. It's something that I do. Share it on your social media. Send them a private message. Journal about it. Write that review for that person, for their book, for their podcast episode. It means more than you'll ever know, and it also brings clarity to the value that you place on the change that it's created for you. So people are listening more than you know, because I can see the number of downloads on my podcast. It's tens and tens of thousands. And yet I think I only have about maybe 50 reviews. And every once in a while I'll get a really sweet message from somebody who tells me that they really appreciated this particular podcast episode. And sometimes it was years ago that I recorded it. And sometimes, honestly, because I've changed so much after 5 years, some of the things that I believed to be true 5 years ago, I may not believe to be true now. And so I have gone and removed some podcast episodes. There are things that I may no longer be aligned with. 5 years is a very long time. And so as I grow, the podcast and the show grows. So the second thing that I've learned is allow yourself to be flexible and flow and to be authentic in sharing where you are in that moment. The third thing is create the sacred space. Create the sacred space, the intention for the conversation. Know what you're going to share. Have a disclaimer that you're not the expert. You're sharing your opinion. You're sharing your experiences. Because that will give you the permission and the freedom to share from a place of being authentic. The fourth thing I've learned is help is important. Support is important. There are a lot of pieces and a lot of time and investment of time that goes into creating a podcast, and you don't know that until you do it. It's about 20 hours of work a week, the way that I create my show and repurpose it. And thankfully, I have assistants that help me, Marie and Kate, and they're wonderful. So when you're listening to somebody's podcast, know that and show them gratitude. The fifth thing that I've learned that I haven't capitalized on is that there are ways to monetize your podcast. I have had sponsorships. It takes another level of time and commitment in order to do that, but it is quite an investment financially in order to have a sustainable podcast show for 5 years. And, you know, part of what keeps me going is that I know that you're listening. So please continue to share with me the episodes you enjoy. Let me know what you want to hear more of. And share with others. Lastly, do it from a place of joy. Never from a place of expectation. Never from a place of anything to prove, or because some type of result that you want to get, or you think that it's something that you have to do. Some of the female business owners that I've coached think that it's a platform that they need to have in order to grow their following. And that isn't true. It is one way that you can grow your audience, but only if it's aligned for you. I am somebody who has a pretty small email list, a YouTube channel, a podcast, and a couple of books. I don't want to be an influencer. I don't want to have a large audience on TikTok or Instagram. I'm very quality time oriented. I create transformational, intimate relationships with the women that I mentor. And so podcast is like the gateway to getting to know me and what my values are. And from there, if you want to have a conversation, we get on a call and we look at the different ways that I can support people. It's a way that I share my experiences and I share the wisdom and the knowledge of the guests on my show. So it's been a platform that I've enjoyed, but it's not for everyone. Some people prefer the quick 30-second spontaneous Instagram reel or TikTok. So only do it if it feels aligned with your daily habits, your goals, your intention, and the amount of time and resources that you're willing to invest. What else have I learned on the podcast? What were some of my biggest takeaways? I really enjoyed my episode with Kate Northrup, learning about feminine flow and cycles. And in fact, some of what I learned from her, I incorporated into my 13 Moons journal. And just this idea that we get to create our time through flow. I really loved my episode with Xavier, the Shadow Alchemist, in understanding that so many people in the coaching world lead from their wounds and not their gifts. And that actually, so often in life, we show up in that way. Those have been some of my biggest takeaways. Thank you for being here. Thank you for celebrating 5 years on the Body and Soul Wisdom podcast. We started out as the Embodied Healing Self podcast in 2019. In 2021, we changed to Body and Soul Wisdom podcast. My intention is to complete another cycle through the end of this year, and we'll just take it year by year and see how it's going. There's going to be a couple changes coming up. I'm really supporting a lot of women business owners, wellness leaders, and coaches to thrive and prosper in their life and their business. So we're going to have a couple conversations around how to support your wellness, coaching, or spiritually fueled business. And also going to share a couple secrets on a few podcast episodes from my retreat facilitator program on how and why, if you're a wellness leader or a coach, you want to add retreats into your business. It is the most sustainable, enjoyable, highest source of income, and it has been for almost 10 years in my business, that if you are a wellness leader, a yoga teacher, a sound healer, a breathwork facilitator, a health practitioner, somebody who loves adventure, fitness, life in general, transformation or change, and you haven't hosted a retreat yet, you're missing out. It's been the core of the biggest amount of joy, the highest amount of income, connection, and impact in my business since 2014. And I have since then created a retreat facilitator program where I help women ready to embody their retreat facilitator archetype, understand the energetics of the retreat, learn the ethics of coaching, creating sacred space, listening, legal, logistics, energetic boundaries, the whole thing. And a lot of women are having success creating retreats in Bali and Costa Rica, buying retreat properties, and hosting retreats in New Hampshire, hosting women's circles. The best part about this is that these women are creating a bigger impact, expanding their circles with in-person events, doing things they love. And sometimes it just starts out with, I just want to have a paid vacation, a place to travel. It's not totally a vacation because you're working, but that's what it started out for me. I'd bring my family to Costa Rica, and then I'd host a retreat, and the retreat would be paid for. And so with the travel. And with my love for travel, that's where it started. And then it just continue to grow and grow and grow and amplify my income to the point where I've created the freedom to now I'm traveling 6 months out of the year for personal travel. And I want to step back a little bit from hosting retreats. I want to step back a little bit from the travel. And so I've decided to pass this knowledge and this wisdom on to other women who are ready to do this. We're not talking about copying somebody else's retreat that you've been to and just charging a couple $100. I'm talking about charging $5,000 to $10,000 for an extremely transformational experience in a luxurious, amazing, adventurous location. So if this speaks to you, I'm going to drop a link to get on a call with me. At this time, it's not a group program. It's a private mentorship only. Because of my travel, there is not another group offering in 2024. The only group offering was the Prosperity Mastermind, which is going to finish in the next month. But if you're ready for this, it's a small investment for a huge reward. This weekend, we also hosted the Prosperity Workshop, Roadmap Workshop, and sold out. So I'll be hosting that again, probably in maybe the late summer, where you can join us for 4 hours, and I'll share some of the methods used to create your prosperous workshop. your prosperous retreat. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Aloha.
The content of this podcast is to educate, inspire, and inform you of pathways to an embodied healing self. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice from your medical doctor, therapist, registered dietitian, or nutritionist for any questions you may have regarding your diagnosis or condition.
Hello, friends, and thank you so much for joining again each week on the Body and Soul Wisdom podcast. I am so deeply honored to share this space with you every week. I know that there are many other podcasts that you could be tuning into, and our community is expanding and growing more with each new episode. I'd like to invite you to come on over to jenmons.com/tribe and receive some of the wonderful gifts that we have for you: a meditation bundle, energetic alignment, 5-element wealth, prosperity consciousness. We have a ton of different gifts available for you to enjoy. Now, we have one small favor to ask. In order for this podcast to get into the hearts and souls of like and light-minded people, we need your support. We would love your review, and would love it if you'd head on over to jenmons.com/podcast to leave a review or leave one on iTunes so that we can continue to share the love beyond out into the world. Thank you so much again for joining in. We'll see you next week.